If I had known how incredible it is to be a grandpa, I would have had the grandkids first. I mean, they are just a delight. Proverbs 17 says grandchildren are the crown of old people, and they absolutely are. 1 hour with my grandkids makes me feel young again. After that first hour, I begin to age rapidly. Oh, love grandkids, and I want to talk to you this morning about the calling of Christian grandparenting, the ministry of Christian grandparenting. I'm discovering that about every church I go to in the history of the church, they've never heard a sermon on the biblical role of grandparents. So if I'm the first at FCC, I am honored. Now, there's a bunch of you that are thinking, oh, shucks, I could have slept in this morning. You're not a grandparent. Well, most of you at some point will be grandparents. The average age of first-time grandparents in America is 47. Kath and I met a lady a couple of years ago who became a grandmother at the age of 33. So it's on the horizon for most of you. And this is all stuff I wish I'd been exposed to before I had grandkids. Now, if you're a grandchild and you're here, you listen up, because I'm going to give you a couple of homework assignments for the next time you're with your mama and papa, especially if they are believers. If you're parents right now, please invite your parents, the grandparents of your children, if they're believers, to partner with you in passing on a legacy of faith to your children. My guess is they will be thrilled to be asked. Most children, ideally, we would pray, would have 6 mature adult Christians feeding into their life. Their mom, their dad, the maternal grandparents, the paternal grandparents. Very few grandkids have that ideal situation. But here we are. And some of you, for a variety of reasons, will never be grandparents or parents. But listen up. You're probably somebody's favorite aunt or uncle. And this stuff transfers to nieces and nephews just as well. So none of you gets a pass on listening up today. If you've spent a lot of time in the Old Testament, the first 2/3 of your Bible, you know that the history of the people of Israel, the Jews, is kind of like a roller coaster at Dollywood, where I live. The Jews are obedient, then they're disobedient. They worship God, they worship idols. They have good kings, they have bad kings. One of the best kings they ever had was King Hezekiah, 25 years old when he became the king. You read all kinds of stuff about him like this. Hezekiah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord. Hezekiah held fast to the Lord, did not cease to follow him, and kept the commands. And on it goes. And Hezekiah didn't get that from his dad, the former king. His dad was one of the most wicked, evil kings Israel ever had. Scripture seems to indicate that Hezekiah got that solid foundation from his grandfather, the king before his dad. He had a powerful influence on Hezekiah, but later in his reign, after his papaw died, Hezekiah begins to slip away from the Lord. By the time he's 40, he's full of pride. He doesn't trust God to protect Israel from the surrounding nations, so he strips all the gold and silver off the temple, the tabernacle, and uses that to bribe the neighboring kings to not attack Israel. And in the midst of this disobedience and lack of faith, God sends the prophet Isaiah into Hezekiah's throne room to inform Hezekiah that because of all this sin, Babylon is going to attack Israel. Jerusalem will be destroyed, carried off to Babylon. And then Isaiah says this to King Hezekiah: because of your sin, your kids and your grandchildren are going to be taken as prisoners to Babylon. They will be tortured. The males will be made into eunuchs, and they will serve as slaves in the palace of the king of Babylon. And here's Hezekiah's response to that message. Oh, that's a very good message you have delivered from the Lord. Because Hezekiah thought, well, at least there will be peace and security in my lifetime. I can't imagine any parent or grandparent getting so hard-hearted they say, I don't care what happens to my kids and grandkids as long as everything goes okay for me. That's a pretty hard heart. But my guess is that most of us in this room, parents and grandparents, great-grandparents, do not have hard hearts toward these loved ones that are around us. Most of us are very deeply concerned about the future of our children, our grandchildren. We're concerned about the very dark culture they are growing up in. Psalm 11 asks this, when the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? Doesn't it feel like to you in our day and age the foundations are being destroyed? My generation is shocked at how fast in our lifetime so many issues in our culture have gone from being unthinkable to being unquestionable. So many things that nobody even thought about 50 years ago. Now, if you even bring up a concern, you're considered a narrow-minded bigot full of hate. When the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? Well, let me talk about what some righteous grandparents can do. Let's look at the foundation. When I got my first glasses when I was 10 years old, I began seeing things I'd never seen before. And that happened to me when I went to the seminar in 2018 that was presented here yesterday. And thank you for those of you who came to be a part of that. But in that seminar, we read Deuteronomy 4:9. I'm sure I'd read it before, but there was a part of it that I just never had grasped. It says, first of all, watch yourselves. Make sure that you remember all the things that you've learned about God, that you've experienced. Don't let that slip away in your old age. And then it says this, and now teach all of those things to your children, A-N-D. How did I miss that little word? Teach these things to your children and to your children's children. That rocked my grandparenting world. I suddenly discovered this isn't a one and done thing. You raise your children to be adults, send them off to college, the military, a career, and then you retire and move to Florida and play pickleball. Now, you're allowed to move to Florida and play pickleball. Nothing wrong with that. But that is not the high and holy calling for this era of our lives. As our adult children grow up, you get fired as a parent. Around 18 or 19, noun, you're still a parent, but verb, you're done parenting. Those days are over. And so as you get fired as a parent, you shift, that scripture says, your generational focus now to the cutest mission field in the world. I can name all 5 people that live on my mission field: Kalana, Caden, Raylan, Cole, and Zane. They are the focus of my evangelistic efforts. There are other people I want to reach for Christ, but they're at the top of the list. So the desire is that we take a step from just being wonderful Christian grandparents to being wonderful, intentional Christian grandparents. So let me share some insights with you that may help you along the journey, and I'll throw some other stuff to the rest of you that are not grandparents. But the first thing to realize is those of us who've reached this stage of grandparenting, even if we're only 33, we've had a lot of grand experiences. Psalm 71 puts it this way: since my youth, O God, you've been teaching me. To this day, I declare your marvelous deeds. Now that I am old and gray, don't let me die, O Lord, until I declare your power to the next generation, till I talk about your might to all those who are to come after me. I'm 73 years old. It's been a pretty good journey up to this point. No complaints. I'm at the age where there's more for me to look at in the rearview mirror than there is in the windshield, right? I don't know how much string is left on my ball of twine, but I think I'm seeing some cardboard beginning to show through. But I'm looking back a lot and seeing God's fingerprints all over. Even the times of my life I thought God had forsaken me, wasn't around, I was mad at him. I'm looking back now. He was there all the time. I've learned a lot. If you're over 65, if you're kind of in my generation, stand up if you're able to stand up. Over 65, just stand up for a minute, because I want all the younger people here to look at all of us that are over 65. You younger people, look at this. We used to be cool. We had long hair. We wore bell bottoms. We invented rock music and contemporary Christian music. Go ahead and sit down. You might faint. Oh, man, if you'll take the time to get to know us, we've got some great stories and we've had some great experiences, and we're called to be good stewards, friends, of all that. We're supposed to be stewards of money. I figured out the other day, if you make $25,000 a year and never get a raise, over the 40 years of your work life, you'll earn $1 million. And God will ask you on that day, having only earned $25,000 a year, God will say, so what'd you do with the $1 million I gave you? Stewards. And we're also called to be stewards of all this wisdom and knowledge and these experiences. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells the parable about the master and his servants, and he gives them a bunch of stuff, goes on a long trip, comes back, and he calls them in and asks them that penetrating question, so what did you do with what I gave you? He's going to ask that of us. What did you do with all that experience and wisdom and knowledge? God's not done with us yet if we're still breathing. You know, you guys that are in your teens and your 20s, you're so concerned about what people think about you. You get into your 30s and 40s, and you're so busy with life, you don't even give a rip what anybody thinks about you. And you get in your 60s and 70s and discover nobody's been thinking about you. Kind of a sad discovery, except maybe those grandkids that you talk to on FaceTime, or you come over and spend a week with you every summer. We've got some grand experiences, and therefore, number two, we've collected a bunch of grand stories. In Psalm 78, you read this, listen, I'm going to open my mouth and tell you some stories. And they're going to be stories about what I have experienced in my long journey with the Lord and things I have learned from my family. Stories are a wonderful way to pass along a legacy of faith to your descendants. In the Gospel of Mark, right after Jesus tells a couple of his little stories, Mark says this, with many stories like these, Jesus would present his message to the people, fitting the stories to their experiences and maturity. And Mark finishes by saying this, Jesus was never without a story when he spoke. Joshua at the battle of Jericho, Jericho. You know that song? Just before that battle, Joshua is leading the Israelites across the Jordan River on dry land. This is 40 years after their parents crossed the Red Sea on dry land. 40 years later, their descendants crossed the Jordan River on dry land, and God has one representative of each of the 12 tribes pick a big rock out of that dry riverbed, carry it over to the promised land. They stack the stones up into kind of like an altar. And then God says this through Joshua. Now, in the future, in the evenings when you're walking down here by the river and your grandchildren ask you, hey, what are these rocks all about? What do these stones mean? God says, tell them some stories. Tell them about slavery in Egypt. Tell them about the plagues, crossing the Red Sea or the Jordan River, manna every morning, the 10 Commandments. The stones will help you remember the stories, and the stories will help you think about God and how good and faithful he's been. And friends, just like the people of Israel, our stories, our personal stories, have been caught up in God's greater story. And just like Jesus had a knack for embedding spiritual truth in his cute little stories, as we tell our stories of our lives to our descendants, we can embed God's encounters with us and how he carried us. In Exodus chapter 4, Moses encounters God in a burning bush, and God gives him a very important and a very daunting task to go to Egypt, just as he's given us grandparents this vitally important and daunting task to be ambassadors for Christ to our grandchildren. And just like us, Moses is rather overwhelmed, starts making excuses. God finally has done with it and says, Moses, what is that in your hand? And Moses goes, what, my staff? It's a rod, it's a stick. It's a piece of wood. It's nothing. And God says, why don't you throw that nothing down in front of me? And bam, it becomes a snake. Remember that? And through the next several chapters of Exodus, God uses the rod of Moses, sticks it in the river Nile, it turns to blood, holds it out over Egypt, hail mingled with fire comes down, holds it over the Red Sea, and it splits open. He hits a rock in the middle of the desert, and water comes gushing out. And then you reach Exodus 17. And it's the night before a big battle with the Amalekites. And Moses is meeting with General Joshua at that time. And he says, now, Joshua, tomorrow during the battle, I'm going to stand over there on that hill, and I'm going to hold the rod of God out over the battle. Hey, did you catch that? It's no longer the rod of Moses. It has become the rod of God. And it's eventually placed in the Ark of the Covenant. And if you're like me, you probably tend to look at your life, think it's not all that much, it's not all that great, especially if I compare it to the biggies. Moses and Abraham and King David and Paul and Elijah, John the Revelator, Billy Graham. Nothing. But God still looks at me and says, David, what's that in your hands? It's a life. It's an existence, pretty much a survival. Nothing. 73 years of some pretty puny, boring stories. And God says, hey, why don't you throw those stories down in front of me? And bam, just like the rod of Moses became the rod of God, the stories of David can become the stories of God and how he interacted with my life and carried me through, blessed me with some great times, carried me through some hard times. That's why we call them God stories. Using my stories to arouse my grandchildren's or my co-workers, to arouse their curiosity about this Jesus that I keep talking about. It's a very simple and easy calling, my friends. Easiest part of being an intentional Christian grandparent. Keep doing all the stuff you do with your grandkids all the time, fishing, putt-putt, golf, whatever else. But when you're with them, every now and then just say, did I ever tell you about the time? Tell them one of your great stories. Tell them one of the hard times you went through. And lovingly embed in that story nuggets of God's truth. So you grandkids, here's your homework. Next time you're talking to one of your grandparents, especially if they're believers, you're on FaceTime with them, you go out and spend the summer with them, they come visit you or they live close by. Next time you're with them, start asking them some questions. How did you two fall in love? What was your wedding like? What was school like when you went to school? Ask your grandparents if they remember where they were when they heard Abraham Lincoln had been shot. Anything like that. Friends, God's taught us some great stuff on this long journey. Don't waste it. Nothing is ever wasted. God is a great economist. Even the parts of your life that you are embarrassed about, you think they're garbage, you want to throw them away, God pulls those out of the trash can and says, oh, no, you don't throw that away. There's a grandchild's going to need to hear that story when they're 18 years old, when they're 22, struggling in their marriage. Friends, you'd never have a message without going through a mess. There's no testimony unless you've gone through a test. So you fainted on stage during the 6th grade Christmas program and fell in the manger? You got braces when you were in junior high? You rode a stampeding elephant in Thailand? You got arrested in high school for drunk driving? Your parents got divorced when you were in the 8th grade? Your campsite washed away during a flash flood in the Grand Canyon? A handicapped kid stole your heart on a mission trip to Haiti? Your mom died in open heart surgery way too young? Yada, yada, yada. There are tens of thousands of stories in this room that need to be told to our descendants. And embedding Jesus and how he carried us through the hard ones and blessed us with the good ones. Some of the people need to hear those stories. You got their pictures hanging on your refrigerator door. Have you ever told your grandkids how you fell in love with Jesus? Have you ever told your grandkids a story of what caused you to go forward and surrender your life to Christ? Friends, when somebody dies, an entire library burns to the ground. The stories are all gone now. And if you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you're striving to follow him, I guarantee he will make sure you have plenty of memorable moments in your life. Some of those memorable moments will be delightful. Oh, so wonderful. Some of those memorable moments will be horrific and oh, so painful. But the primary question is, as you tell any of these stories, do you just point to yourself and how you toughed it out, pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps? Or do you pull God and use those stories to point towards Jesus and your intense love for him? Friends, don't let your personal library of stories burn to the ground without first sharing many of them with your descendants and using them to point them to Jesus and your love for him. So we've had all these grand experiences that have resulted in all these grand stories, so that means we have a grand responsibility. I read Psalm 78 to you. Listen, I'm going to open my mouth and tell you stories. It continues on. We will not hide these stories from our children, and we will certainly tell them to our grandchildren. And our stories are going to highlight the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, the wonderful things he has done. And here it comes. He commanded our ancestors to tell these stories to their children so the next generation would know this good news even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. And they would all put their trust in God, not forgetting. 4 generations. Kathy and I are praying for our grandchildren's grandchildren. We want this treasure. Lord, you're more precious than silver, more costly than gold. Oh, we want that inheritance to be passed along. So I've got some friends who are going to help me illustrate that. So if you 4 guys want to get back up here, we're going to run a relay race. And you guys know where you are supposed to be right now. And it looks like Colton, you're going to have to go or Kobe, right? Oh, there's Kobe. Yeah, it looks like you're going to have to go all the way out in the lobby because we got a good crowd here today. We want to pass on the baton of our faith to our grandchildren. We don't want to drop the baton. We want to pass it on in a solid way, right? So, and the point is, Steve he's thinking about his leg of the relay race. He wants to run that well, but he's also thinking about this guy. He wants him to finish well. The 4th runner, he wants him to finish well and win the race. So we want to pass on the truth from generation to generation. So, and you're the crowd. So you get to cheer on the runners. All right, ready? On your mark, get set, go. Steve, time yourself. All right, cheer them on. Here we go. All right, coming all the way. Oh, look at the handoff over there. Good handoff going on. All right, all the way around the back. Oh, he's faster than Steve was. This is great. Goes up there's Colby. Now Colby comes on around the aisle here. And we're coming home. Look at that. Good handoff. Good handoff. Whoa. Perfect. Awesome. Oh, you guys were great. You guys were great. But as you know from the first service, you guys need to reset because there's a problem with a relay race. The problem is when you hand off the baton, you think you're done. I did my job. And no, you're not done. You keep running. If you still got breath, you keep running as long as God will give you breath. So we're going to change the picture from a relay race to the passing of the Olympic torch. We want the light of God's truth into our kids' lives in this dark world. And in the Olympic torch, if you've ever watched that going to the Olympics, there's 50 to 100 people running along with that torch. And you get to carry it for 60 seconds, and then you pass the torch on the next person to be honored. And you don't stop running, right? As long as you can, you run with that torch. So we're changing the image. You still get to cheer on the crowd, but let's start the torch now. Go, Steve. All right, here we go. Cheer Steve on this time as he passes on the Olympic torch. Oh, look at that light being passed on. Now that looks better when there's 2 of them running together. And then watch what happens here with Colby. Now there's 3 of them running together. As long as you're breathing, you keep running. And they come in. And you want to see all 4 generations coming in home. This is awesome. Good job. Wow. Awesome. That looks pretty. Thank you, guys. Give them some applause for what they did. Thanks, guys. That's a beautiful picture, isn't it? There'll be a little something extra in your paychecks this week, guys, so we appreciate that. Psalm 78, he commanded that we tell these stories to our children and our grandchildren. Find creative ways to inform them about God's goodness and faithfulness and love. Friends, it's our responsibility as grandparents, along with the parents, along with the youth workers and the children's workers that are serving in other areas of this building. There's a lot of other people, too, who carry this responsibility, but we're a part of carrying the responsibility of making sure that the gospel is clear to our grandchildren. It's the Holy Spirit's job to make the gospel dear to our grandchildren. Not everyone who hears the gospel responds to it, and it's going to break our hearts. But we have the responsibility to at least at some point sit down and make sure our grandchildren have clearly heard the gospel of Jesus and how you respond to his grace. And I know it's daunting, but none of us are hard-hearted like Hezekiah was. We're deeply concerned about our descendants. We would love it if God could use us to be a part of moving them toward faith in Christ. So that's why I love what's happening with this move of God's Spirit. And that's exactly what it is. We call it the Legacy Coalition because we had to call it something. There's no offices. It's tens of thousands of grandparents across America, Canada, and now into 9 other countries. This move of the Spirit is grabbing grandparents' hearts. And the grandparents are going, man, how do you do this? And so they're inventing resources. They're writing books, the creativity of what you can do at Easter and at Christmas and at Thanksgiving when you're with your grandchildren. Their creativity is off the charts. So you'll see a banner in the hallway out here and over by that welcome station. There's a bunch of little brochures that look like this. tell you a little bit about some of the resources grandparents are inventing. It'll take you to the website, and you will scroll and be amazed at what God's up to. Grab some of these and give them to the grandparents that aren't here today, that you would love to catch this vision. So those are out there on the table. So there is hope. You're not in this alone. If you attended the seminar yesterday, raise your hand. If you were a part of the seminar, the rest of you that are kind of thinking, this is intriguing me, talk to these people. They got 6 hours of preparation and training over the weekend. Keep doing all the stuff you're doing. Go to their t-ball games. Go watch them cheer at basketball games. Take them putt-putt golfing or hiking or teach them sewing, whatever it is you're doing with them. But every time you're with them, there's that vision of intentionality, because even non-Christian grandparents are doing all that other stuff. People that don't give a rip about Jesus go and cheer their kids' games at t-ball and watch their kids cheer. That's nothing more than what the non-Christian grandparents are doing. We want to be intentional. So every time I'm with my grandkids, there is this hovering in my mind, is there something that's going to happen today? And it doesn't always. But is there going to be something that happens while we're together today that I can turn and give a little word for God, a little nugget of God's truth? A few years ago, I took Cole, who's now 13. We live in the Gatlinburg, Smoky Mountain tourist area. And there's a tourist attraction called Alcatraz. It's a museum of crime and punishment. And I wanted him to see what his life would turn out like if he didn't pay attention to me. So we had a blast going through the museum. And at the end, there's a room you go in, and it's all black. And on the far wall is a diamond on the wall. It's actually a buzzer. And this is supposed to be like an art museum with a diamond, and you're a jewel thief, and you've got to steal it. And they turn off all the lights, and a bunch of red laser beams go across the room. Dun, dun, da, da, dun, dun, da, da, da. And you got to sneak over and under all those lights. If you break the beam, lights come on, you've been caught. I'm a big guy. I kept breaking the beams. And Cole would get mad. Papa! We'd have to start all over again. So the fourth try, I just stood against the wall. Cole did his little ninja dude stuff, got all the way, didn't break any beams, slapped the buzzer, lights came on, he got a bunch of coupon points. And it was great. I'm so proud. He's going to be such an awesome jewel thief when he grows up. So I'm very, very, very proud. 30 minutes later, we're sitting at, as he calls it, Chick-fil-A. And I say, Cole, we had just memorized the 10 Commandments that summer with our grandkids. Cole, we just saw a museum says if you break the laws, if you break the rules, there's punishment. And the punishments are not good. You just saw that. And Cole, you and I memorized the 10 Commandments, and I've broken some of those laws. And I know you, Cole, and you've broken some of God's laws. And so we're supposed to get punished. And I don't want to be punished. You don't want to be. And Cole, that's why I love Jesus. Because Jesus didn't break any laws. He didn't break any rules. He was perfect, but he took my punishment. That's what the cross is all about. It was supposed to be me. He took my punishment. And I just want you to know that's why I love him. 45 seconds sitting in a Chick-fil-A, just sharing God's story as we have created a little story between the two of us on a creative outing. And the adversary will work overtime to cause us to get complacent or distracted or lazy and fail to live up to this grand responsibility. But you have more influence than you know. We have the grandkids a lot, and I get frustrated, especially as they moved in their teenage years. I'm so frustrated with how much time they spend on their screens. They're talking to me less and less. They would giggle and wiggle when we would try to pray with them or read Bible stories to them. Do they read any of the letters that I send to them every 8 to 10 weeks? Is any of this making any difference? Well, of course it is. Galatians 6 promises us, don't get tired of doing these good things. Because at the proper time, you will reap a harvest if you don't give up. Proverbs 13 says, a good man or woman leaves an inheritance for their children's children. Now, you can leave an inheritance for their college fund if you want to, but I'm talking about a much greater inheritance that we leave to our children's children. Steve Chapman wrote a song that says, I want to finish well. I want to end this race, still leaning on his amazing grace. I want these last few miles to testify that God never fails. I don't want to fall down this close to the line. I want to finish well. So friends, grand friends, please pray about this responsibility to train and motivate and equip ourselves to leave a generational legacy to those who are coming along, to be ambassadors for Christ to our grandkids. There's a little video we showed this weekend. We'll show it. You can't see it quite as well with all the light in the room, but it's a good illustration of what we're talking about here. It's a grandpa getting out of bed. He used to be a runner. Looking at pictures of his granddaughter, little redheaded granddaughter. And now something's motivated him. He goes into his old storage shed, pulls out a weight, a big heavy weight. See if he can lift it. Every morning, goes back in, works on it a little bit more. Kind of embarrassed when other people see what he's doing. Puts a picture in front of himself to motivate himself in lifting this weight. Neighbors are getting a Christmas tree out of their car. It's almost Christmas time. And he gets motivated. Hmm. Huh? And he's at his daughter's house for Christmas dinner. And look who's coming down the steps. It's a star at the top of the tree. So you can take care of the things that really matter in life. And our grandchildren are being lied to on a massive scale of what really matters in this world. And may God equip us. You don't try to speak Spanish. If I try to speak Spanish, it comes out, hey, Taco Bell, quesadilla, Chihuahua. You don't try to speak Spanish. You train to speak Spanish. You don't try to become an intentional Christian grandparent. You train. You buy some books. You go to some websites. You explore the resources so that God could use us in some way to lift these dear, precious grandchildren above the distractions and the temptations of this crazy, dark, fallen world, so that like Zacchaeus in the sycamore tree, who could finally see Jesus above the crowd, and better yet, discover that Jesus could see him and had been looking for him. May God use us to lift our grandchildren above those distractions so they get a clear view of who he is and how much he loves them, because the cry of this movement is, I want my grandchildren in heaven with me. That is the driving vision of this era of my life. May our legacy as grandparents be the same legacy we read about Joshua as he was dying. The people not only stayed faithful to God while Joshua was alive, even after he died, they stayed faithful, and they remembered everything that they had learned about God. Father, I pray that when Kath and I are done here and you call us home, even after we die, our 5 grandchildren and their grandchildren will know you and love you and serve you and have this same hope of heaven. Use us in whatever ways, grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles. Give us this vision of being your representatives to this struggling generation in this dark world. We give you the glory. It's all for you, but it's also for their eternity. We ask this in the name of the one we want them to fall head over heels in love with, your Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen.